My boss smiled while congratulating him for the promotion that had my name on it. And the worst part? Everyone clapped. I stood there, hands still, face calm, while my entire career was stolen in front of me like it was a scheduled event. He shook his hand like it was earned, like it was clean. But I saw it. The slight pause before the announcement, the quick glance they exchanged, the quiet understanding. It was planned, not a mistake, not a last-minute change, a decision. And I wasn't supposed to notice. I didn't react, because reacting gives them satisfaction. Instead, I smiled, small, controlled, and clapped, louder than everyone else. That confused them. Good, because confusion is where control starts shifting. I walked up to my boss after the meeting. Calm, polite. Congratulations, I said. He looked relieved, like he expected something else. I knew you'd understand, he replied. Understand. Such a dangerous word. I nodded. Of course, I said softly. I always understand patterns. He didn't catch it. People like him never do. Because they think betrayal is invisible when it's actually predictable. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I opened my laptop, and I started digging. Because promotions don't get stolen overnight. They get redirected. Quietly. Emails, approvals, internal notes. All of it leaves traces. And I had spent years learning how this company breathes, where decisions are made, who really holds power, and most importantly, who doesn't. 3 hours later, I found the first crack. A financial report. Buried. Unflagged. Ignored. Except it wasn't a mistake. It was too clean. Numbers rounded just enough. Expenses shifted just slightly. Not illegal, but intentional. That's when I understood something deeper. My boss didn't just steal my promotion. He needed it. Urgently. Desperately. Which meant he was already losing something. And when someone is losing, they make rushed decisions. Predictable ones. That's where I come in. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing happened. Same routine, same smile, same silence. But inside, everything had changed. I stopped trying to grow inside the company and started studying it like a system I was about to break. Weeks passed. He got comfortable, started making louder decisions, taking bigger risks. And every time he did, I documented it. Quietly. No confrontation. No warning. Because exposure too early ruins the game. Then one day, something unexpected happened. I got called into a meeting. Not by him. By someone above him. The kind of person you don't usually see. The kind that only appears when something is wrong. I walked in. 3 people. Silent. Observing. One of them slid a document toward me. Explain this. I looked down, and for a second, my heartbeat slowed, because it was the same financial pattern I had discovered weeks ago. But this time, it was highlighted, flagged, investigated, and the name attached to it was his. I didn't rush. I didn't act surprised, because surprise raises suspicion. Instead, I leaned back slightly and asked a simple question. Do you want the version he gave you? Pause. Or the one he tried to hide? That's when everything shifted. Because power is not about knowing something. It's about knowing something they don't expect you to know. They exchanged looks. Subtle. Careful. Continue, one of them said. And I did. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just facts. Patterns. Connections. Clean. Sharp. Undeniable. By the time I finished, the room wasn't questioning me anymore. They were calculating him. And that's when I made my first real move. Not revenge. Positioning. I don't want the promotion, I said calmly. That surprised them. Of course it did. People always expect you to fight for titles. But titles are small. Ownership is power. I want access, I continued. Temporary. Strategic. Direct reporting. Silence. Because now they were seeing something else. Not an employee, an asset. And assets get protected. One of them leaned forward. Why? I smiled. Because if there's one leak, pause. There are more. That was the moment, the exact moment, I stopped being replaceable and started becoming necessary. Weeks turned into months. I wasn't visible, but I was everywhere. Meetings I was never supposed to attend. Reports I was never supposed to see. Decisions I quietly influenced without ever taking credit. And slowly, very slowly, I started mapping the entire structure. Not just the company, the parent company, the investors, the hidden stakeholders. Because real power doesn't sit in offices. It sits in shares. And shares can be bought. That's when I made the second move. I didn't invest directly. That would be obvious. I built a chain. Small entities. Quiet acquisitions. Nothing big enough to notice. But together, powerful enough to matter. At the same time, his situation got worse. Complaints increased. Decisions started backfiring. And every time he tried to fix something, he made it worse. Because pressure reveals incompetence. And I let it happen. I didn't interfere. I didn't save him. Because sometimes the smartest move is letting someone destroy themselves. Then one evening, I got a call. Short, direct. They're considering a restructuring. I smiled. Because that word means opportunity. The next few weeks were silent chaos. Meetings behind closed doors. Numbers shifting. People getting nervous. And him? He was still pretending everything was under control. Still giving speeches. Still acting like the leader. He had no idea he was already being replaced. But not by someone else. By me. The final step came quietly. No announcement. No drama. Just a document. Majority shares. Transferred. Signed. Final. The day I walked into that boardroom again, it felt different. Not because of the room. Because of me. He was already there. Confident. Relaxed. Until he saw who walked in behind me. Board members. Investors. And the same people who once asked me to explain this. His expression changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. Recognition. And then realization. I took my seat at the head of the table. And for the first time, he didn't speak first. I did. Let's begin the performance review. The room went silent. Because this wasn't a meeting anymore. This was accounting. And I had everything. Every decision. Every mistake. Every manipulation. Laid out.
Clean. Precise.
He tried to interrupt. I raised my hand. Not aggressively. Just enough. And he stopped. Because power isn't loud. It's recognized. I leaned forward slightly. Before we continue, I said softly, pause. There's something you should know. His eyes locked on mine. Tension building. Because deep down, he already felt it. Something wasn't right. And then I said the one thing that made the entire room shift. I didn't just buy into this company.
Pause.
Slow breath. I bought the one above it too. Silence. Heavy. Unbelievable. And for the first time, he looked small. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because what he didn't know yet was the one detail that would destroy him completely. The thing I had been hiding, even from the board. The one move that turned this from revenge into something far bigger. I leaned back, watching him carefully, and smiled. Now, pause. Let's talk about what you really did. The room didn't move, but the air changed. Because now, this wasn't about a promotion anymore. This was exposure. I watched him carefully. His fingers tightened slightly on the table, just enough for someone like me to notice. He was calculating, still trying to find a way out. That's what made him dangerous. And predictable. I didn't rush. Because truth delivered too fast feels like an attack. And attacks make people defensive. Instead, I opened a file. Not dramatically. Not aggressively. Just calmly. Let's start simple, I said. My voice steady, controlled. The quarterly projections you approved. Pause. That didn't match internal reports. A screen lit up behind me. Numbers.
Clean. Precise.
And then, the second version. Slightly different.
Too perfect to be an accident.
He leaned back. Relaxed. Almost smiling. I trust my finance team, he said. Of course you do. I nodded slowly. And they trusted your instructions. That landed.
Soft.
But sharp. A few heads turned toward him. Subtle shifts. The beginning of distance. He didn't react. But his eyes flickered. That was enough. I clicked again. Emails appeared. Not highlighted. Not dramatized. Just there. Time-stamped.
Precise.
His words. Adjust the reporting window. Pause. Align it with external expectations. Corporate language. Harmless if you don't understand it. But I did. And so did the people in that room. He exhaled slowly. Still controlled. Context matters, he replied. Yes, it does. That's why I built it. I agree, I said softly, which is why I included everything. Another click. Full thread. His pressure. His urgency. His fear. Now, it wasn't strategy. It was desperation. And desperation is never respected in boardrooms. Silence spread. Heavy. Uncomfortable. I didn't look at him. I looked at them. Because perception is never controlled by the accused. Only by the observers. Moving on, I said calmly.
He shifted forward this time.
trying to regain ground. This is selective, he said.
Of course it is.
Everything I do is. Then help us expand it, I replied.
Soft.
Open. A trap. Because now, anything he said would only add to the narrative.
He paused.
Too long. There it was again. The crack. I didn't press. I let it breathe. Because silence forces people to reveal more than questions ever will. Then I moved to the next file. Vendor restructuring. Another screen. Contracts. Numbers that didn't align. Payments redirected. Not illegal, but intentional. Always intentional. You approved these changes personally, I said. He nodded.
Confident again.
Yes. Good. Then explain why the same vendors
Pause.
are linked to your private consulting network. That did it. Not loudly,
But deeply.
because now this wasn't mismanagement. This was conflict of interest, the kind that ends careers quietly.
And permanently.
Someone on the board leaned forward. Is that true? He didn't answer immediately, because there was no clean answer. Only versions. I have external interests, he said finally. Careful, measured, as do many executives. True, but incomplete. I tilted my head slightly. And how many executives route company decisions? Pause. Through those interests? That silence was different, sharper, because now the room wasn't observing. It was judging. I let that settle. Then I stepped back, physically, creating distance, because this part wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. And that's the most powerful position you can take. When others finish the work for you. Voices started. Quiet at first, then firmer. Questions.
Direct.
Uncomfortable. And for the first time, he didn't control the room. He reacted to it. I watched everything. Every glance, every shift, every person deciding which side they were on. Because this wasn't about truth anymore. It was about survival. And then, right when it felt like it was over, I made the move he didn't expect. I closed the file. Silence. I'm not here to destroy you, I said calmly. That confused everyone. Good. Because confusion creates openings. I'm here to fix what you broke. I turned to the board, which means we have two options. I paused, letting it sink in. Public investigation.
Pause.
Or controlled exit. The room froze. Because now, this wasn't exposure. This was negotiation.
He looked at me.
Really looked this time, trying to understand how far I was willing to go. What I actually wanted. Power? Revenge?
Control?
All of it. But I would never say that. Because power is never declared. It's demonstrated. And what does controlled mean? One of them asked. I answered without hesitation. Immediate resignation.
Pause.
Full internal cooperation.
Pause.
And permanent removal from executive roles.
Clean.
Merciless. Professional. The kind of ending that sounds respectful, but erases you completely. He let out a quiet breath, almost like a laugh, because he understood. This wasn't a fight anymore.
It was a choice.
And I had already removed every other option. He looked around the room. No allies. No support. just distance and judgment. Then back at me. You planned all of this, he said quietly. I held his gaze. No, I replied.
Pause.
I waited for you to plan it for me. That line stayed in the air because it was true. Every mistake he made, every decision, every shortcut, he built this ending himself. I just made sure it was seen. He leaned back slowly, defeated, but still thinking. Always thinking. Fine, he said finally. The word felt small, but heavy. I'll resign. And just like that, it was done. No shouting, no chaos, just silence. The kind of silence that ends careers. But I wasn't satisfied.
Not yet.
Because something inside me still didn't sit right. Something too clean, too easy. And I've learned something over the years. When something feels easy, it's usually incomplete. As the meeting started to dissolve, papers closing, chairs shifting, I noticed it. A glance.
Quick.
Almost invisible. Between him and one of the board members. Not fear. Not anger. Recognition. That's when everything inside me went still. Because that look wasn't from someone who just lost. It was from someone who already had a backup. I didn't react. Of course I didn't. I simply gathered my files.
Calm.
Controlled. But inside, a new pattern was forming. Faster than before. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. And the real problem? I had just removed a piece, without seeing the entire board. As I stepped out of that room, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. Silence. Then a voice.
Low.
Measured. You're good.
Pause.
But you're still late. The call ended. And for the first time since this started, I felt it. Not fear. Something sharper. A realization. I wasn't the only one playing this game. I didn't call back. People who hang up first aren't looking for conversation. They're setting tempo. And I don't chase tempo. I take it. I stood in the hallway, phone still in my hand, and replayed the voice in my head.
Calm. Controlled.
Not threatened. Which meant one thing. They weren't reacting to me. They were expecting me. That realization didn't scare me. It focused me. Because if someone is waiting for your move, they've already positioned themselves. And that means they've left traces. I walked back in, but not to the boardroom. To compliance. The place nobody likes, and nobody watches.
Perfect.
I didn't ask questions. I asked for access. And when they hesitated, I used the only leverage that matters.
Authority.
Not loud. Not aggressive. Just quietly undeniable. Temporary oversight, I said. Signed this morning. They checked. Of course they did. And when they saw my name attached to that authority, their resistance disappeared. That's the thing about power. Once it's documented, it doesn't need explanation. I sat down, logged in, and started pulling threads. Not his files. Too obvious. Too late. I went higher. Parent-level approvals. Shadow transactions. The kind of movements that never show up in regular reports. Because real decisions don't live where employees can see them. They live in places designed to be boring. And boring is where people hide the most dangerous things. 30 minutes in, I found it. Not a mistake. A pattern. A repeated authorization code. Same structure. Same timing. Signed off by someone who never attends meetings. That was the first red flag. The second? The approvals didn't benefit the company. They protected something else. Something external. I leaned back, eyes still on the screen, and let the silence build. Because I've learned when something doesn't make sense financially, it makes sense strategically. I traced it further, cross-referenced timelines, matched it with his decisions, and suddenly everything aligned. He wasn't the architect. He was a shield, a visible problem covering an invisible one. That's when the call made sense. You're good, but you're still late. Late to what? Not the takeover. The game. I smiled slightly, because now I knew what I was really dealing with. Not a corrupt manager. A controlled structure. And structures don't fall from one move. They collapse when pressure hits the right point. I printed nothing, saved nothing, because evidence is dangerous when you don't control the narrative yet. Instead, I memorized it. Patterns,
Names.
timings. Then I closed everything,
Clean.
untouched, like I was never there. Because the first rule of moving above someone else is making sure they don't feel you coming. That evening, I didn't go home. I went somewhere else. A place I had been quietly building for months. A small office. Unbranded. Unlisted. But fully operational. Screens lit. Data flowing. Not big enough to attract attention, but powerful enough to see everything. Because while they were running a company, I was building visibility. And visibility is control. I sat down, opened a secure line, and made a call. Activate it. No names. No explanations. Just that. On the other end, a pause. Then, are you sure? I looked at the screen, at the patterns I had just uncovered, and answered without hesitation. Yes. The line went dead. That's when the second phase started. Not exposure. Disruption. The next morning, everything looked normal. Meetings scheduled. Emails flowing. But underneath, small things began to shift. Approvals delayed. Transactions flagged. Nothing major. Just enough to create friction. Because friction reveals pressure points. And pressure points reveal who's really in control. By noon, I saw movement. Not from him. From above him. Someone was intervening. Quietly fixing things. Smoothing disruptions before they became visible. That confirmed it. He wasn't the problem. He was the layer. And now, the layer above him was active. Good. Because the moment hidden players move, they become visible. I tracked every correction, every override, every silent adjustment, until one name started appearing more than the others.
Consistent.
Precise. Untouchable. That was my target. But I didn't move yet, because targeting someone too early turns you into the threat. And I wasn't the threat. Not yet. I was still the solution. By evening, I got another call. Same number. This time, I let it ring twice. Control. Then I answered. You found it.
the voice said.
Not a question. A statement. I didn't respond immediately, because silence makes people reveal more. You removed him too early, the voice continued. Interesting. So they wanted him there. Not for leadership. For cover. Or maybe, I said softly.
Pause.
I removed him exactly when I needed to. A small silence. Then something new in their tone.
Respect.
That depends, they said, on whether you understand what he was protecting. I leaned back slightly. Eyes calm. Mind sharp. I understand enough, I replied.
Pause.
To know you're not calling to threaten me. Another pause. Longer this time. Because I was right. You're not wrong, they admitted. Of course I wasn't. Threats are loud. This was quiet, calculated, strategic, which meant they didn't want me gone. They wanted me aligned. I can make this easier for you, they said. There it was. The offer. Always comes after recognition. I don't need easy, I replied.
Soft.
Controlled. I need clarity. The kind that forces honesty, without demanding it. A breath on the other end. Then finally, meet me, they said.
Time. Place. Public.
But controlled. Of course it was. People like that never choose random locations. Everything is intentional. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, because this was the pivot. Not revenge anymore. Something bigger. And the dangerous part? I didn't know if I was stepping into a negotiation or a test. The next evening, I arrived early. Always early. Sat where I could see everything. Entrances, exits, reflections. And then they walked in. Not what I expected. Not older. Not intimidating.
Calm. Too calm.
They sat across from me, like this was already decided. Like I was already part of something. You're efficient, they said. I didn't smile. Efficiency depends on intention, I replied. Their eyes held mine. Evaluating. Then let's not waste time, they said, and slid something across the table.
A file. Thin.
But heavy. I didn't open it immediately, because the first move in a negotiation is never curiosity. It's control. What is it? I asked. They leaned back slightly, watching me. Your company, they said.
Pause.
Before you bought it. That sentence hit differently, because it wasn't about what I did. It was about what I didn't see. Slowly, I opened the file, and in that moment, everything shifted again, because the company I thought I took over was never mine to begin with.
I didn't react.
Not because I wasn't shocked, but because shock is expensive. And I had already paid too much for emotions. I kept my face still, I scanning the file slowly, like it was just another report. But inside, everything sharpened. Ownership layers. Not simple, not direct. Complex. Deliberately fragmented. Shell entities. Cross-holdings. Silent partners. And at the center of it all, a structure that didn't belong to any one person. It belonged to a system designed to look invisible. I closed the file gently, placed it back on the table. You built this, I said quietly. Not a question. They didn't deny it. Of course they didn't. People like that don't lie. They position truth. We maintain it, they corrected. Maintain. Like it was something that needed protection, not something that needed exposure. I leaned back slightly. So, the company I bought
Pause.
was already controlled. They nodded once. Yes. Simple.
Clean.
And him? I asked. A layer, they replied. Of course he was. Disposable. Replaceable. Just like I used to be. I let that sit for a moment. Because now, this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about alignment. Or destruction. There's a reason we didn't stop you, they said calmly. That made me look up. Because now, we were getting somewhere. You removed a weak link, they continued. Not emotional. Not personal. Just strategic. And you did it without damaging the structure. A compliment. Carefully delivered. I didn't accept it, because compliments are often disguised leverage. And now, I asked.
Straight.
No hesitation. They studied me for a second, not judging, measuring. Now we decide, they said.
Pause.
Whether you stay above the surface. Their eyes sharpened slightly, or come beneath it. There it was. The real offer. Not a position. A role. Inside the system. Invisible. Untouchable. The kind of power that doesn't get announced. I didn't answer immediately, because silence forces them to reveal more. What happens if I say no? I asked. Their expression didn't change. Then you continue as you are, they said. Pause. Until you hit something you can't control. A warning, not a threat, which made it more dangerous. Because it was true. I looked at the file again. At the layers. At the structure. And I understood something most people never do. You don't destroy systems like this. You either join them, or get erased by them. But here's what they didn't understand yet. I wasn't built to follow. I was built to adapt. I slid the file back toward them. I don't work under systems, I said softly.
Pause.
I redesign them. That was the first honest thing I said all night. For the first time, they smiled. Not polite, not formal.
Real.
Good, they said quietly. Because that's exactly what we were testing. Testing. So this wasn't recruitment. It was evaluation. I leaned forward slightly. Then let me be clear. I continued. My voice calm, measured. I'll stay.
Pause.
But not as part of your structure. Their eyes narrowed just slightly. Interest. Explain. I did. I keep the company. Pause. I stabilize it. Pause. And I remove anything that makes it dependent on hidden control. The room between us went still, because what I was offering wasn't cooperation. It was evolution. And in return, they asked, of course, everything has a price. You stay out of my operations, I said.
Pause.
And when I choose to expand, I held their gaze. You don't block it. A long silence followed. Heavy. Because now, this wasn't about power. It was about boundaries. And people like them don't give those easily. Finally, they exhaled slowly. You're asking for autonomy, they said. Yes. And if we refuse? I didn't blink. Then you'll spend the next few years, pause, trying to control someone you could have aligned with. That landed, not as a threat, as a projection, because they knew it was true. Another silence. Then, a small nod. Temporary, they said. Of course. Nothing like this is permanent. Temporary, I agreed. That was enough. No handshake. No signatures. Just understanding. The most dangerous kind of agreement. I stood up.
So, did they?
And just before I left, they said one last thing. You're not late anymore. I didn't respond.
I didn't need to.
Because now, I wasn't catching up. I was inside. Weeks later, I sat in the same boardroom where it all started. Same table, same seats, different energy. This time, they were waiting for me. I walked in calmly, placed a single document in front of the chair he used to sit in, empty now, and took my place at the head. Before we begin, I said softly, there's one final item. They looked at me, focused, attentive, because now I didn't need to raise my voice. Authority speaks quietly. I opened the document. Not for them. For the record. Effective immediately.
Pause.
We are restructuring executive leadership. No reaction. They expected that. But then I added, and implementing full transparency protocols. Pause. Including retroactive audit disclosures. That shifted things. Subtle, but real. Because transparency kills hidden systems.
Slowly.
And I saw it. The hesitation. Not from the board. From somewhere deeper.
Good.
That meant they were listening. Watching. Feeling the pressure. Exactly where I wanted them. I closed the file. And leaned back.
Calm.
Controlled. Untouchable. Because this time, I wasn't reacting to betrayal. I was shaping the environment. And somewhere out there, I knew they were watching, calculating, waiting to see if I would fail, or become something worse. I smiled slightly, because they still didn't understand one thing. I never wanted revenge. Revenge is emotional, temporary. I wanted control.
Permanent.
And now, I didn't just own the company. I controlled the system that tried to hide from me. Silently. Completely. And this time, no one would ever see me coming.